So, I mean, that is the land of unconfirmed reports.
Yes, we came, we saw, we died.
That was former U.S. Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's reaction following the capture and brutal murder of Libyan President Muammar Gaddafi. According to some, the invasion of Libya was about protecting civilians. Others said it was about Libya's vast oil reserves. But everyone was convinced that it was all about currency. Specifically, Gaddafi's plan to introduce the gold dinar, a single African currency made from gold that would eventually replace the US dollar when trading with Africa. Many scholars have said that it's the kind of thing that one has to plan almost in secret and launch it when ready, because as soon as you say it, you'll have a bullseye on your back. You see, the world relies on the US dollar, giving America unparalleled economic dominance. Nearly 90% of all international currency transactions are in dollars. 60% of foreign exchange reserves are held in dollars, and almost 40% of the world's debt is issued in US dollars. This gives the United States extraordinary power over nearly anyone who imports or exports anything, anywhere. Hillary Clinton's victory lap was explained as mission accomplished for the US NATO intervention following reports of mass atrocities under Gaddafi's regime. It was later revealed that President Obama himself had asked his advisors to draw up options including a new military front in Libya, and the Defense Department was reportedly standing ready with the full spectrum of ground military operations required. Unless you plead temporary insanity, you have to recognize the double standards. There were several other parts of the region in the Middle East and North Africa which pretty much needed humanitarian support, but which the West either ignored or didn't really pay the same amount of attention to. And so the world watched as Western armies pummeled Libya with bombs with the pretext of humanitarian intervention. But the 2016 publication of Clinton's emails revealed another agenda behind the Libyan war, one which it seems was achieved: prevention of the demise of the American buck, as well as prevention of the creation of the independent hard currency in Africa that would have freed the continent from its economic bondage, an outstanding rival to the dollar and the euro, and put an end to the exploitative French-African franc. In the months leading up to the military intervention in 2011, Gaddafi called on African and Muslim nations to join together to create this new currency that would ensure they sell their oil and other natural resources around the world for only gold dinars. It is an idea that would have shifted the economic balance of the world, as countries' wealth would depend on how much gold they have, not how many US dollars they trade or stash. To give some quick context, it is banks, not governments, that create most of the money in Western economies. Originally, all currencies in the world reserves were in gold. But in 1933, President Franklin Roosevelt replaced gold domestically with central bank created reserves, but gold remained the reserve currency for other currencies worldwide. In 1944, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were created in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to unify this bank-created money system globally. This is when 44 countries agreed that the US dollar would be the global currency. Effectively, this meant that the money supply was now created privately as debt at an interest. This system requires a continuous supply of debtors, and over the next half-century, most developing countries, mostly Africa, wound up in debt to the IMF. The loans came with strings attached, including structural adjustment programs that basically stagnated growth of their economies. Under the agreement, the US dollar was pegged to gold, while other global currencies were pegged to the US dollar. When the United States was no longer able to maintain the dollar's gold backing, in the 1970s, it made a quick deal with OPEC to back the dollar with oil, thus creating the petrodollar. It was President Richard Nixon that made the announcement in 1971 that the greenback would no longer be exchanged for gold, a move that was meant to cement U.S. dominance and boost economic growth for the superpower.
If you don't want to find gold, feel free to click skip. But if you do dream,
boost economic growth for the superpower. This is the tricky part. Any other country that purchased oil from OPEC would have to exchange its currency into US dollars before completing the sale. Oil and later any natural resources were priced in US currency, not the currency of the countries where the resources come from. So if the dollar loses value, the natural resources also lose value. This system provided at least two immediate benefits to the United States. It increases global demand for US dollars, and it gives the United States the ability to buy oil and natural resources with a currency it can print at will. This global financial system was created and held in place not by pure economics, but by politics through the pact with Saudi Arabia, where gold was replaced as the world reserve currency and ultimate store of value. That position was taken by the US dollar. This meant that the ultimate store of value was transferred from gold to the US dollar. Back to Africa, in 2009, President Muammar Gaddafi was named chairman of the African Union, wresting control of a body he helped found and had long wanted to remake his Pan-African image. This doesn't mean that Gaddafi was the best guy on earth. Despite the unprecedented economic success in Libya, he ruled over the country with an iron fist and was accused of funding insurgencies in some African countries. But how he planned to use the post as chairman of the African Union was unclear to the West at the time. In the early 2000s, Gaddafi had tried to improve his relations with Western powers and Western companies by offering to open up key parts of the Libyan economy to foreign investment. Having witnessed the invasion of Iraq in 2003 and later publicly warning at an Arab League summit that America hanged Saddam and we might be next, Saddam Hussein in the year 2000 had announced that Iraqi oil would be traded in euros and not US dollars. We all know too well how that went. Swift sanctions were slapped on Iraq, an invasion, ouster and sentencing of Saddam, and widespread destruction of the country. Violent intervention in Iraq was not chiefly about the security of the people, as was claimed. It was about money and oil and the security of global banking. Gaddafi must have thought to himself that with the rest of Africa backing him, his fate would not be condemned to resemble Saddam Hussein's. Gaddafi was a strong supporter of a long-held dream of transforming Africa, divided by borders that were drawn arbitrarily by Western powers, into a vast unified state that could play a powerful role in global affairs. He had repeatedly proposed immediate unity and the establishment of a single currency, army and passport for the entire continent. The last two perhaps weren't really a bother to Western interests, but the creation of a single gold-backed currency, alarm bells started ringing. Gaddafi's threatened attempt to establish an independent African currency was not taken lightly by Western interests, and their next moves illustrate the lengths the West will go to protect their interests. In 2011, then French President Nicolas Sarkozy reportedly called the Libyan leader a threat to the financial security of the world. Of the 3,000 emails released from Hillary Clinton's private email server, one of the emails, dated April 2nd, 2011, read in part, Gaddafi's government holds 143 tons of gold and a similar amount of silver. This gold was accumulated prior to the current rebellion and was intended to be used to establish a pan-African currency based on the Libyan gold dinar. This plan is designed to provide the Francophone African countries with an alternative to the French franc CFA. This undoubtedly was one of the factors that influenced President Sarkozy's decision to commit France to the invasion on Libya. According to the email, France's plan was driven by the following issues: a desire to gain a greater share of Libya's oil production, increased French presence in North Africa, improve Sarkozy's domestic political situation in France, provide the French military with an opportunity to reassert its position in the world, and lastly, address the concern of the advisors over Gaddafi's long-term plans to replace France as the dominant power in Francophone Africa. Conspicuously absent is any mention of humanitarian concerns. The objectives are money, power, and oil, as well as protecting France's stranglehold on Francophone Africa. What made Gaddafi's moves a greater threat to the powers that be was that he did more than just sell his oil in another currency. He had been laying plans for the Pan-African gold currency by 2023 in a bid for African reliance, which would lead to the toppling of the financial system. He had done more than organize an African monetary coup. He had demonstrated that financial independence could be achieved. Gaddafi's most ambitious infrastructure project, the Great Man-Made River, was turning desert regions into a thriving breadbasket for Libya, and the $33 billion project was being funded interest-free with zero foreign debt through Libya's own state-owned bank. That could explain why this critical piece of infrastructure was first to be bombed in 2011. It had been put in the Guinness Book of World Records as the world's largest irrigation system. But Western media reluctantly shared news on the project, even though all other projects globally paled in comparison. NATO forces not only bombed the pipeline, but finished off the project by bombing the factory producing the pipes necessary to repair it. So, to the question, why was Gaddafi assassinated by the West? It was all about money and oil and the security of the global financial system. Of course, many people in NATO countries are motivated by humanitarian concern. That is why their governments sell wars as acts of philanthropy. Simply put, generosity sells. But governments do not typically intervene in other nations in order to benefit humanity. There you go, guys. Please let me know in the comments.